to not stay within those silos, but talk to other ministries, talk to civil society, talk to communities and engage them meaningfully. It is the only way. And lastly, we are asking member states and the UN to join us in defending civic spaces like here across the street. We can only achieve the SDGs and beyond if major groups and other stakeholders, all of civil society, also communities have access to UN institutions to delegate and their voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. We're good on time for now. We might extend a little extra 10 minutes after 2:30, just to give the opportunity to people online to also raise their questions and comments. Many of them unfortunately couldn't be here with us. But before I do that, maybe I'll take 2 or 3 comments or questions from the floor, and then we go with the people online. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. My name is Loida Garcia Fibo. I'm part of the first delegation of the American Library Association to the UN. And I have my colleague here, Fabi, part of the delegation. My question will be for the ambassador. Thank you, Ola. What steps could the UN take to strengthen access to information infrastructures so that the SDGs continue driving innovation, as you mentioned?
I have to respond immediately, or you will collect more?
Let's take another 2, and then we give an opportunity for them to respond. Anyone else in the room?
I actually have questions for fellow speakers. I wanted to ask, Ollie, I know you haven't actually been a speaker, but I wanted to ask you a question, which is how you see that we've talked a lot about synergies, breaking down silos, lived realities, et cetera. And we're in this process of kind of significant change at the UN, where all of it's going to end up hitting at country teams. So my question is, if you had a crystal ball, which nobody does, how would you see this playing out, particularly in terms of kind of the peace building development, whatever you want to call it, nexus, and kind of catalytic opportunities there? And then I had a similar question to you, Ambassador Narvaez, because you were president of ECOSOC, and there is this huge push for ECOSOC revitalization. So how do you see this? How do you also see this playing out? 5 years left till 2030. 2 years until the next SDG summit, 3 until the pact is reviewed. Kind of what do you think the most critical elements are? And then I promise my last question. But for Crystal and for Crazy Bear, thank you so much for what you said and how you said it. I think it just made everybody stop and think for a second. I feel like a lot of what you do would be considered something like adaptive governance kind of vis-a-vis resources, natural resources. My question is as you have seen things change in your communities, what's been the best way to make sure that decision-making processes are inclusive? So as you have had to adapt, what's actually been, how have you been able to listen effectively and then implement what you've heard?
Small community or the whole community?
As you wish.
So in the small community, which is just a tribal territory, we go by old governing rules, which are consensus, which means if this table has a decision, everyone has to agree. It's not democratic. If one person is not in agreement, we have to table that issue, come back, and in that time, you have the time to go try to get that person that's in disagreement. This is good for everybody. This is good for the whole community. And hopefully when you come back, you can have consensus. Now, we're in a municipality, a county that's multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural. So we have to do a lot of storytelling, a lot of enrolling, a lot of this is good for all communities. You know, it really starts with reminding people of their children And then what's easy in this climate, remind them of their elders. Because where one day the elders used to have all this great care, now the elders are just as vulnerable as the children from their onset. So that's.
Yeah, he hit it perfect, just traditional government consensus, like we make sure everybody has a say. Mind you, we have a contemporary government and it is very contentious.
Maybe before we go online, we take
yeah.
ambassador's response as well as Oli.
I-
first.
I completely, thank you, Carol, and thank you for the questions. I completely understand my responsibility here because I'm representative of the state. But I just can't speak on behalf of Chile. I cannot speak on behalf of all member states, okay? But I just want to say one thing that I believe is so important. The necessity to understand that we have UN agencies and we have member states, okay? And we not always understand why we need to see that difference, even when we are just one UN. Because the UN agencies are implementing a mandate that comes from member states. That I completely understand that in the field, in the moment of, be inclusive with information, with communication process, we need to also understand the different responsibilities that we have, okay? And I believe I'm a strongly supporter of the work of UN agencies are doing. And when many criticisms are on UN, I always say in my interviews back in my country, whoa, let's see, because one thing is UN agencies, another thing is that we, member state, not doing our job. I mean, in Security Council, for instance, but it's quite mixed, But for this purpose, I think that I strongly believe in the necessity of the strategies that each UN agency should develop in regarding information and communication process. And I think that's an important demand that civil society can also bring to the table all the time with UN agencies all the time. With member states, it's quite different. And you know that because member states have a different relationship with civil society, depending on their own realities and their own priorities and their own, political systems and everything. And we need to be very aware of that. And we discussed this many times during my presidency in the ECOSOC. We do not have the same perspective regarding how you should conduct open government, for instance. So we are very different among member states. I'm not trying here to lecturing anyone, because one thing that we need to learn in the UN community is that we are different. And in that diversity, we need to see that is a strength and not a weakness. But we need to have different kind of approaches regarding who is your counterpart. But regarding UN agencies, I think that they have the mandate and the obligation to be very inclusive in information processes. And we are trying from member states that we believe in the inclusiveness of civil society, that they do so, And also from our, Chilean perspective, we always believe in that necessity to be very inclusive in communication and information strategies and initiatives. Regarding your question, well, I think that it's up to all of us to defend the development pillar. I mean, I told in my notes here today, and in the context of the UN 80 as well, we have been very vocal, Chile and other Latin American countries. Because if you go into the history of the UN and you see when 1945, which state signed the UN Charter, Chile was there, and 50 countries were there, and 20 comes from Latin America, 20, And I always want to, bring this back to the table, because I think that we have a perspective on the importance of social, cultural, political rights. And today, Latin America and the Caribbean are not necessarily the most, how can I say, I have to be careful with my words, but we are not so active in the, UN community as we should be. So that's why we see an opportunity with the next Secretary General. And we believe that the next Secretary General should come from our region, from Latin America and the Caribbean, I have to say. And I think that's an important part because we think that we bring to the table an important perspective on multilateralism and also in development and in sustainable development. If you remember, the first social summit on social development was in Copenhagen, but the person that was in charge of that was a Chilean guy. And it was the Director General of ILO at that moment was Juan Somalia. And I'm telling this because I think that we have an important cultural and political background that put development in the center as we put human rights in the center as well. So, but it's up to all of us to defend ECOSOC mandate. And I did as a president of ECOSOC when some voices were there to try to dismantle many commissions or certain commissions within the ECOSOC. And I said, I opposed totally to that decision at that moment or to that proposal at that moment, saying that we need to strengthen the ECOSOC and not dismantle the ECOSOC. Putting outside the CSW or putting aside another commissions, I think that we, on the contrary, we need to continue strengthening this main organ of the United Nations. Of course, we need to streamline and everything, the work of ECOSOC, but also I think it's the big window for civil society or the big door for civil society. So also we think that it's up to civil society to have a strong voice on defending ECOSOC and its mandate as the unified platform to discuss all these important aspects. And UNAID is also initiative to, when we are reviewing mandates and everything, well, we need to also address the role of ECOSOC. So we have an open opportunity to continue in this interaction with those allies that you can feel that are more, close to this idea. I mean, talking about the member states that you can recognize as a natural allies to do and to have this conversation. Thank you.
Gracias, Paula. It's really wonderful to have the ambassador with us. And I mean, some of you may not know, so I'm half Brazilian, half British, and I completely understand the Latin American presence here in the UN. And I also I'm very glad that Brazil is normally the first, or is always the first to speak in the opening of the General Assembly. There is a kind of tradition of that presence of Latin America really at the heart of the UN, and I'm very glad with the change of government in Brazil, how strong Brazil has been to come back into this agenda, and they'll be presenting another VNR next year as well. So fully recognize that leadership from Latin America and join your call for a strong female Latin American Secretary General.
We hope so.
And to come back to your question, so what can we do as the major groups and other stakeholders and as the NGO major group within that structure? I mean, I do also want to pay tribute to Ambassador Narvaez as president, because in that role, you really did set the bar very high and open the space. And we're really glad that Bob Ray, the ambassador from Canada, has continued that process and has built on the excellent base that we had already with Ambassador Narvaez, and even before that with Ambassador Stoyeva from Bulgaria as well. So there's been a steady process of strengthening that engagement with the role of the president of ECOSOC and the major groups and other stakeholders. And we now have those regular monthly meetings that's continued, that was established last year. We also this year launched a new handbook at our plenary session together with the president, and that handbook sets out some clear steps to a more collaborative governance, at least within this forum, the HLPF, and gives us a clearer roadmap for how we can hear diverse voices and make sure that those doors are not closed to us. So it's really essential that we build on that. And I think, we need to strengthen participation across the whole of the UN, and that's where this UN 80 process, we need to be very careful, we need to be very engaged, we need to make sure that it's not used as a way to scale back the UN, but rather as a way to further open up some of the UN processes to maybe make them more accountable and more open to stakeholder voices. And we were glad to have the Undersecretary General Guy Ryder speaking at our major groups and other stakeholders side event on Monday. And so And he again said, yes, they're open to that dialogue. We had engaged with him last year during the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future. So there's an opportunity there to build on that relationship. And we know that from September onwards, there will be a process for dialogue around those reforms, particularly around the reforms of the agencies. And I also want to come back to one other thing, Paolo, that you mentioned, which was the development pillar. I think you talked about that right at the start. So beyond the ECOSOC dialogues, we need to look at the actual agencies that are delivering on the ground for UN. And UNDP is clearly one of those agencies that often interacts closely with civil society at the local level in many countries. And we really want to see that strengthened and potentially to have better sort of mechanisms for co-governance also with those agencies. And I think that's something that we can raise through that UN80 process and see what more can be done.
Thank you, Oli. Thank you for your responses. Now we'll have around 10 minutes to hear from our colleagues joining us online. For that, I'll first give the word to our global organizing partner from the HLPF major group, Lani, who's joining us from Sweden. Yeah, Lani.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Crystal, Maria. I think everyone has contributed in a unique manner from the positionality. And as we are looking also at the chat, highlighting problems, but also how do we come with solutions, right? So I'm gonna give the floor to Lucas. Maybe you want to say your, ¿quieres decir tu pregunta? Y la digo en inglés. Lucas, si quieres que diga tu pregunta. Well, I'll just, yeah, Lucas, I see your, puedes decir la pregunta. Sí. Sí, te escuchamos.
Hola, buenas tardes. Saludos a todas las mesas que están reunidas ahí. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Y mi siguiente pregunta es, ¿por qué se sigue sosteniendo derechos sobre derechos cuando todos los ODS y las personas que en realidad quieren cambiar el destino de las posibilidades deben ser la fuente del organigrama del nuevo progreso? Muchas gracias.
Lani.
Could you hear the translation from Carmen?
No, you have to
Sorry.
repeat it,
Okay,
sorry.
so yeah, well, the question is, why are we sustaining rights over rights when all SDGs and people who want to change the destiny of possibilities are the source of the organigram of new progress?
Okay. Thank you, Lani. Let's hope we got that right. If not, I have it here. And then we have next Chris, who's raised his hand. Chris, you want to unmute yourself, please?
Chris, can you?
Yeah, hello everyone, good evening and good morning and good afternoon. Hi, I wanted to really appreciate my joining of the major group, which is very essential to my and my program and my objectives in the work I do. And I really like to elaborate an overarching panelist discussion about the UN, which is very important to the world, and we need to expand their works and also encourage and join together to make the UN actually what it is. And then as a part of the major group right now, I hope to be getting all the meetings and also be very active in the major group and my young NGO, which I am the lead right now because I've been working for other ones, but I have one right now mine. And I also want a situation whereby the accreditation should be a little bit less stringent so we could be able to participate. Like I hope to do that, in the coming COP. And if I have opportunity, I would be doing that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I believe Lani, due to the translation, she has other 2 questions that she
Yeah.
will read on behalf of our members.
Yes, so I'll read them. So one is, what concrete actions or innovations have proven effective in engaging everyday people and showing how global goals directly affect daily lives? Also, we have this question of having in mind the complexity and the urgency of the processes to sustainable development. What steps would you recommend to effectively put into action the key principle that everything is connected? And the last one from Magali, how can we achieve to have a optimal financing to close the gaps and ensure SDGs development and Paris Agreement? Our organization that it's research-based, we have concluded that if it was possible, we could implement a small tax to patrimony of the richest persons in the world.
Thank you, Lani. Thank you, colleagues. I don't see any other hands online, and due to time constraints, what I would do is to give each speaker around a minute to respond to some of the concerns that our colleagues have raised. Many have to do with what concrete actions we need to move forward. So if we can start with the ambassador, because we have a tight schedule.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm not sure if I get the Lucas question, but he said something like why we are just adding the perspective of rights, something like this, no?
Yes.
Because he said in Spanish, but I speak Spanish, but I couldn't get the.
Yeah. Why are we still sustaining rights over rights when all SDGs and people who want to change the destiny of possibilities have the source of the organigram of new progress? It's a very complex question.
I just want to say that if we are discussing about rights over rights, it's because unfortunately we are not guaranteeing the exercise of those rights for many, many people. So unfortunately, the inequalities, and if we apply an intersectional approach to how people can live those rights in reality, we're, very far away of that possibility. So we need to continue updating that agenda because it's a real agenda. It's a current situation that is affecting many million people in the world. So that's why we need to continue addressing these issues, Lucas. Unfortunately, it's like this. Regarding a very general response on concrete actions, I just want to bring to the table one example I think is possible, and it's care system. And I want to discuss about care system or care societies. In Latin America, it's a very good example to show how we can all work together. Civil society organizations, UN agencies and governments and private sector working together in the same vision on how we address a very important dimension of our lives for everyone. We all know about care because we all have been part of that. We're caregivers or care receivers. So we all know the importance of care. So I think that the work that UN agencies have been doing during all this time with civil society and with governments to put in place care system is a good example of a good way to do things in this development agenda and in economic agenda, because we are addressing human rights, we're addressing development, we're addressing many things in this approach of care system. So I think that's a good example on how these things can work actually.
Thank you, Ambassador. Briefly to our colleagues, Crystal and Jason, if you want to jump in.
So one, I'm sorry, hopefully they can translate this, but so as Jason and I have talked about this, the SDGs are rooted in international law. It prioritizes people, dignity, and justice. And to hold governments accountable or in corporations accountable, right? That's what the rights are. So, framing goals as rights shifts them from charity or policy choices to legal and moral obligations. And then rights-based approaches leads to sustainable outcomes. So the development that respects human rights tends to be more inclusive and participatory and resilient in our communities. And so it acknowledges the agency of people, especially marginalized communities, to shape solutions that affect them. They're participating in that. Jay, do you have anything you want to add?
I agree, it's dignity. It's dignifying to be asked what's best for your place. How should we go about developing in your place? We don't build on flood zones. It's not sustainable. We don't build in high fire area. It's gonna burn. Ask the people who lived there forever what's gonna happen in that place, right? It's just dignifying. It's, as you said, it's not guaranteed. Some governments have their own way, but we move that way, and I believe good examples are easily followed. So if the more smaller countries get on board, then those ones that are holding back kind of flow into that good example.
Margaret, Anna, whoever wants to. You can go ahead.
To go next. So I want to touch on the question of how to engage people in the SDGs. So I think basically just let them speak for themselves. Let them tell you what it is that works for them and what they need. So where Brooke works, people choose to have a donkey, but what they lack is access to veterinary care and training, especially women want access to feed, access to extension services that they usually don't have access to. So there is really no need to impose solutions from the top down. And then when you talk to young people anywhere in the world, they will tell you the same thing. They have their own ideas and they can talk about their own lived experience. Last year, I did a short presentation on the SDGs at my daughter's school to year 6 students. They're 11 years old. They have their own ideas. So, you know, they immediately grasped sort of what is the glue of the SDGs, that it is all connected. And someone even asked, so why are there so many goals? Isn't it all one and the same thing? So yes, listen, and then, yeah, and people will just tell you what they already know and what they need. And then there was a question about how everything is connected. So I just want to emphasize that there are so many holistic, synergistic approaches out there. Some are emerging, some are more established, like One Health. There's also a concept of One Welfare, where the well-being is connected. There's also a very powerful concept of planetary boundaries, which sort of really should impose that sort of barrier on how far we can go with our own human-centric development. And I really believe we need to learn from local communities and especially indigenous people, because they see everything as connected, and we did too. And I'm talking about, you know, people in the global north, but we unlearned it. So we can learn it again, and there are examples that follow.
I also want to touch upon the engagement of citizens. I mean, we do all realize that we are speaking among each other to the converted. We are using a certain jargon. We understand the documents and everything, but we cannot translate this to the people, and this is a problem. Especially now that we've seen that the SDGs as a framework is constantly instrumentalized by the extreme right in many countries. And precisely, I mean, putting the logo on SDGs, they trigger people to be against it. But if you start talking about the contents in simple language, talking about nature, how it affects their livelihood, everybody's aligned. So we have a disconnection there between what we're discussing and how we're discussing it, and reluctantly. So I think one of the next challenges of the movement is how to reach out to the ones that they're not on board and to put them on board, because I'm really, really convinced that they will come if they understand. But we're not helping them understand the situation.
Thank you. Yeah, no, this has been so great. Thank you so much to everybody's intervention. I guess I have like 4 things, like what to do. One is speaking to what you just spoke about, which is kind of translating what we do into different types of language and the way people understand things. So whether it's a return on investment argument, whether it's an intergenerational legacy argument, whether it's just a basic, like, how do you get through the day? But the narrative bit is extremely important, because it also then speaks to people's incentives, and that helps people get in on the game. And you can back that up. The second thing is on interlinkages. So there are tons of interlinkages, whether, I mean, in the governance, climate, health, violence, justice, education, anti-discriminatory frameworks. If you focus on those, you'll get the efficiencies, but you'll also have it speak to the way people live their lives. And I think that that also then plays out in terms of breaking down UN silos, UN country teams, and across context, so kind of a more universal approach. The last bit, last two bits is trying to harness the revolutions at stake. I, for one, am like terrified of AI, but there is an enormous potential if those markets are continue to be grounded in principles of accountability, transparency, equality, et cetera. And so there is a real opportunity to actually leave no one behind. But it does start from the ground up. It has to be kind of local, and it calls for basically a system of governance that's both preventative and adaptive, based on kind of lived realities. So I think it was, yeah, I guess those would be my 4.
Can I just add? If we localize the SDGs, so how we're doing it home is we connected SDG 6 about clean water and how it's connected to our town's river quality. And then we connect with our people's values. So we're framing it through cultural, spiritual, and community values. And that's how we're able to connect the youth and the elders to understand, because when we can break it down enough for people to understand on their level and their issues, then we can get them to think about the broader world issues that we're all connected. Like, it's a very circular.
Thank you very much for everybody. And thank you to our folks online as well. I will pass the word to Johnny, who will do a recap of all of the different ideas and discussions we had.
Maybe not all of them, but an attempt. So what we come to right now is a moment of profound disruption. And we are absolutely in an existential crisis with unequal impact on people. And we have to do better with what we have, and we also have to dare to dream about what we don't have yet. And some of the ways we can do better with what we have is to strengthen development pillar as a centerpiece and as a guarantor of human rights. Use SDG as 16 as a catalyst for change. Maintain our belief in and strengthen our resolve for a multilateralism that listens, learns, and acts. And recognize that diversity and inclusion work best, and that SDG fulfillment creates better cultural and economic data. It is not a struggle to get the SDGs in place. It is what will make the world a better place. We need to disrupt silos and short-term thinking by using overall strategies, by looking at meta-level issues. The example was raised that animals don't think in silos. And if we are to build the world our hearts desire, our lives cannot be thought of as a silo that's separate from the animal and the natural world, using One Health as an example. We also have to address the role of distribution, debt, and taxation gaps in creating the current crisis that we're in, and look at deep transformation of economic systems in order to not just address and fix those things, but to set new parameters for a new basis of economics. So we have to keep the high level work also connected with those who are doing the work on the ground. We have to align global governance and budgets with SDG values. And some of the ways we might do that is by reforming ECOSOC and some UN agencies to strengthen mechanisms for co-governance. We have to focus on the next Secretary General and be really proactive in getting the right person into that job, and also onto UN 80 processes.
which we know need to include more stakeholder voices and build on relationship with more dialogue. And so that UN 80 process is a huge opportunity in front of us, and the door is closing quickly. So we need to put our foot in that door and get going with UN 80. We also need to restructure global governance in alignment with the recognition of rights of nature. We have to recognize that we are interdependent with all beings and with the planet herself. We have to do rights-based and systemic accountability. We have to transform the very frameworks that we're working from, not just, again, fix and change those frameworks, transform the deeper frameworks to move beyond norms for extractive development, move beyond norms that isolate civil society from decision makers. We have to bridge the gaps between member states, the UN agencies, and civil society. And we have to demand support for UN agency that processes, since they have the mandate to be inclusive. So we need to shake hands with that mandate, meet it where it is, and find that in the inroads to make the difference with UN agencies. We have to not allow money to dictate. We need to address debt and taxation as the impediments they are to having the world we want. We have to focus on those who are most behind, but at the same time, I think we might learn here from indigenous wisdom. I would ask you, in your traditional societies, would there ever have been such a concept as somebody behind? You're laughing. There was probably not even language to say that someone was behind. It would be a ridiculous concept in a lot of indigenous thinking. And so we need that deep understanding of our existential unity. And that's where the indigenous appreciation for cultural and spiritual values can really serve us. And at the same time, we can let the vulnerable show us the way, because their survival demands that they respect nature, because they live closer to it than most of us do. And we have to dignify what they have to teach us. We have to value and we have to raise up the wisdom that's on the ground. We have to do what humans have done for centuries before this relatively short time where we disrupted nature. For centuries, our ancestors lived in accordance with nature. And they kept good relations with all their neighbors, at least that was the aspiration. We have to put principles and commitments in the center and recognize our interdependence and our interconnectivity. We have to hold on to the hope that SDGs are a roadmap to the world we all want to live in. And we need to take a stand that transformation is possible. We say that word and we think it's some pipe dream out there in the ethers, but we need to really live and breathe and believe and stand for transformation at the deepest, most systemic levels. And we have to take ideas like hope and principles and dignity, things that are invisible. And we have to keep talking about those things. They're easy to say and they're difficult to implement, and still we have to say them, and we have to engage in these dialogues, even though they may not lead to an exact concrete end. And so that's where, again, indigenous wisdom can be very helpful, because it understands speaking in these invisible places and the power of that. And we can't get stuck in the rhetoric at the same time. So it's always something we need to be, mindful of, where do these take us with one another and how do we walk them? We have to dare to dream about the world we want, because that's the very root of transformation. We have to allow the space for dreaming. Our Hopi brothers and sisters, they put dreams in the center of what they do. They really, we have to stop discarding dreams as something other than getting work done. It's part of getting work done. It's seminal to getting the work done. And we have to understand that in this meta crisis, it's the opportunity for metamorphosis. And that's what we're here for.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oli will give us a quick announcement, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank again all of our great speakers, the excellent summary just now by Journey, and wonderful facilitation by Carol. I also want to thank the Baha'i community for providing us with this space to meet, and the wonderful interactive technology that works actually much better than inside the UN. So it's really fantastic to have it working working so well. I want to also thank my fellow organizing partners, Lani, who's been online, Jessica, who guides a lot of our inputs in the official position papers that we submit to the UN every year. All of the work that so many of the colleagues here have done, Elizabeth, others have helped us to bring this event together. I also just want to remind people that if you are part of the NGO Major Group, there are opportunities to get more involved in those working groups. We're always looking for great volunteers to help to guide our work. It's a collective effort. So please do get in touch, and we'll be looking for new regional organizing partners, we call it, so people to help us to guide the work in different parts of the world over this coming year. So look forward to keep in touch, and thanks again. See you all soon.
Thank you.
I changed our flight, so we're leaving in the morning. I'll come tonight to dinner. Yeah, I'll come to dinner tonight.
Margaret, Anna.
I'll come over there.